Most people in the courtroom would later remember the billionaire's tears. Others would remember the shocking video that exposed a criminal conspiracy. But none of them ever forgot the small blue camera clutched in the hands of a 4-year-old boy. 3 weeks earlier, on a cold night at Julian Vance's Hamptons estate, that same little boy stood frozen beside a roaring inferno that was swallowing millions of dollars worth of corporate secrets. His mother, Elena, held him tightly against her chest as flames climbed into the sky. Within minutes, the police would arrive. Within hours, she would be arrested. And within days, the entire world would believe she was a thief, an arsonist, and a traitor. No one realized that the only witness capable of proving her innocence was the silent child everyone ignored. "Get out of my house, you worthless thief." The words shattered the quiet of the prestigious Hamptons estate. Julian Vance, a tech billionaire known for his cold calculation, stood on the gravel driveway, his face dark with fury. Right beside him, his elegant fiancée, Victoria Sterling, shrank back into his shadow, a hand pressed to her trembling lips as she pointed accusingly at Elena. Elena stood frozen on the lawn, her arms locked tightly around her 4-year-old son, Leo. The little boy whimpered, squeezing his favorite blue plastic toy camera against his chest, the one item he refused to leave behind, using it to look at the world when the real world became too loud. Elena was just the estate's live-in maid, a single mother trying to build a quiet life, but right now, her world was burning. Behind them, the luxury guest house was being consumed by a violent, roaring fire. Thick orange flames licked the night sky, turning Julian's private office and his highly confidential corporate financial archives into ash. "Julian, look at me, I didn't do this." Elena gasped, the terrifying heat of the blaze hitting her face. "I was in the kitchen when the alarms started screaming." "She's lying, Julian!" Victoria cried out, her voice sharp with panic. "I saw her slipping away from the back porch right before the fire erupted. She knew you were doing a full financial audit tomorrow. She did this to destroy the records." But what Julian couldn't possibly see beneath his fiancée's tears was a calculated malice. The fire wasn't an accident, and the truth behind the destruction was far more sinister than anyone on the estate realized. "Save it for the police, Elena," Julian said, his voice dropping to a deadly, quiet whisper. "You're done." Within the hour, the flashing red and blue lights of emergency vehicles painted the driveway. Arson investigators quickly discovered traces of a harsh chemical accelerant splashed directly along the back exit, the exact path Victoria claimed the maid had taken. Facing a high-profile case with a billionaire victim, the state line was clear: Elena was looking at a maximum 20-year prison sentence. As she was escorted toward the police cruiser in handcuffs, she looked back at Leo, who was crying silently in the arms of a responding officer, still pointing his little plastic toy camera at the burning building. But 3 days later, a shocking discovery changed the entire trajectory of the case. An anonymous digital file was leaked directly to the district attorney's office. It contained encrypted banking records showing that over $4 million had been systematically siphoned from Julian's primary corporate accounts over the past 6 months. The timeline was undeniable, but the revelation left everyone reeling. The fire hadn't been set out of spite, it was an execution order for the physical backup drives stored inside that guest house. And the anonymous tip attached to the file pointed directly to a secret offshore account registered under Elena's name. The trap was perfectly laid, and the evidence seemed ironclad. Yet, neither the police nor the billionaire knew that a silent witness had captured a single, undeniable truth that would turn the entire frame job upside down. The momentum of the state's case against Elena grew completely unstoppable over the next week. Julian's high-priced legal team, fueled by his immense wealth and a burning desire for corporate retribution, worked tirelessly alongside the prosecution. They painted Elena not just as an arsonist, but as a brilliant, cold-blooded corporate spy who had systematically targeted Julian's empire from the inside. But as the pressure mounted, small cracks began to appear where no one was looking. While Elena sat in a maximum security holding cell, separated from her son, Victoria was busy making moves of her own. She spent hours comforting Julian in his Maine mansion, urging him to fast-track the legal proceedings and leave the Hamptons behind for a fresh start in New York City. She claimed the memories of the fire were too traumatic, but her real urgency stemmed from a darker anxiety. What Julian didn't know was that the offshore account tied to Elena's name hadn't been opened by the Maid at all. It was a dummy corporate shell entity, meticulously set up using a stolen copy of Elena's identification papers that Elena had handed over to Victoria months ago for a routine background check update. The public was gripped by the media circus surrounding the Maid of Malice, as the local news channels labeled her. The narrative was perfect, and the public execution of her character was absolute. Elena's court-appointed defense attorney, an overworked man named Marcus Vance, no relation to Julian, realized they were walking into a slaughterhouse. Every single piece of physical, digital, and eyewitness evidence pointed directly at his client. Elena, they have the bank account signature, they have the accelerant path, and they have an eyewitness who puts you at the scene, Marcus warned her across the scratched metal table of the visitation room. If we go to trial with nothing but your word, the judge is going to make an example out of you. You will spend the next 2 decades behind bars. I am innocent, Elena whispered, her voice raw from days of sleepless panic. I don't know anything about millions of dollars. I just want my son. Where is Leo? Leo was currently staying with a state-appointed foster family, completely uncommunicative. He hadn't spoken a single word since the night of the fire. The only thing he did was sit by the window, clutching the scuffed blue plastic camera, repeatedly pressing the shutter button that made a tiny, mechanical click. The foster parents assumed it was a trauma-induced coping mechanism. But 2 days before the preliminary hearing, Marcus received an unexpected breakthrough. A forensic digital analyst he hired to look into the leaked bank ledger discovered something highly unusual. The encrypted files hadn't been uploaded from a remote server or an offshore location. The digital footprint traced back to a high-speed Wi-Fi network registered directly inside Julian Vance's primary mansion, sent at a time when Elena was already locked inside a police interrogation room. This meant the real embezzler was still walking free inside the billionaire's inner circle, actively manipulating the evidence from safety. Marcus knew this was the thread that could unravel the entire conspiracy, but he needed undeniable proof to present to the court. The stakes were raised to a lethal degree when Victoria secretly met with the lead arson investigator at a secluded diner on the outskirts of the city, slipping a heavy manila envelope across the booth. She needed to ensure that no further forensic sweeps were conducted on the guesthouse ruins. The web of corruption was tightening around Elena, and the courtroom doors were about to open for a trial that seemed completely decided before it even began. But nobody in that courtroom was prepared for what the silent, traumatized 4-year-old boy was bringing with him inside his toy camera. The preliminary hearing opened in a packed courtroom, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of Julian Vance's immense influence. The media lined the back rows, cameras flashing every time Julian and a flawless, poised Victoria walked down the aisle. Elena sat at the defense table, her skin pale and her hands shaking, looking smaller than ever against the massive power of the state. The prosecution wasted no time launching their attack. They presented a seamless timeline of the evening, the financial audit scheduled for the following morning, the accelerated blaze that consumed the servers, and the damning offshore account documents explicitly tied to Elena's social security number. To the judge and the gallery, it looked like an open and shut case of a greedy employee caught in a corner. But the real shockwave hit the courtroom when Victoria took the stand. With practiced tears, she looked directly at the judge. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt, Victoria sobbed into a lace handkerchief. But I saw her running from the flames. And what breaks my heart the most is that just days before the fire, I caught her digging through Julian's private desk drawers in the main house. When I confronted her, she threatened me. A collective murmur rippled through the gallery. Julian's jaw tightened, his gaze burning holes into Elena. The betrayal felt absolute. Elena gasped, shaking her head in desperation, but Marcus held her down, urging her to remain silent. The trap was closing, and Victoria's testimony was the final nail in the coffin. When Marcus stepped up to cross-examine Victoria, he tried to introduce the digital forensic report, the proof that the anonymous banking files had been leaked from inside the Vance mansion while Elena was in custody. But the prosecution immediately leveled a fierce objection. Because the data had been obtained from a private network without a formal subpoena, the judge ruled it inadmissible for the preliminary hearing. Marcus's hands turned cold. Their only leverage was completely wiped out. The defense has no further questions, Marcus said quietly, the weight of imminent defeat crushing his chest. Victoria stepped down from the witness stand, a subtle, triumphant smirk playing on her lips as she glanced at Elena. The prosecution rested its case, confidently asking the judge for an immediate trial date and a denial of bail, ensuring Elena would remain trapped behind bars. The judge raised his gavel, ready to bring it down and seal Elena's fate for the next 20 years. Elena buried her face in her hands, her spirit entirely broken. But just as the wooden gavel hovered in the air, a small, piercing voice echoed from the back of the silent courtroom. "Mommy didn't do it." Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway, having slipped past the bailiff, was 4-year-old Leo. He was clutching his scuffed blue plastic camera, his knuckles white, staring straight at the judge with an intensity that made the entire room freeze. The judge lowered his gavel, his brow furrowed as the courtroom erupted into whispered chaos. "Order! Order in the court," the judge demanded, banging the gavel twice as his eyes locked onto the small boy standing in the doorway. Julian's legal team immediately stood up. "Your Honor, this is a highly sensitive proceeding. A child cannot disrupt these chambers," the prosecutor barked. But Marcus saw a final, desperate glimmer of hope. He rushed toward the back of the room, kneeling down to Leo's eye level. The boy's foster mother was breathing heavily, having just caught up to him. "I'm sorry, he just broke away from my hand when he saw his mother on the TV monitor outside," she stammered. "Leo," Marcus said softly, his voice echoing in the tense, quiet room. "What do you mean Mommy didn't do it?" Leo didn't look at Marcus. His small, trembling finger pointed directly across the room, past the defense table, straight at Victoria Sterling. Victoria's face instantly flushed, her polished composure cracking for a split second before she masked it with a look of deep pity. "The bad lady put the stinky water on the porch," Leo said clearly, his voice carrying an innocent conviction that made the entire gallery lean forward. "I took a picture of the dinosaur on the porch. But she was there." "This is ridiculous!" Victoria exclaimed, standing up from her seat next to Julian. "Your Honor, this is a traumatized child being coached by the defense to defame me. It's disgusting." Julian put a comforting hand on Victoria's shoulder, but his eyes were narrowed, darting between his fiancée and the little boy. A seed of doubt, no matter how small, had just been planted in the billionaire's mind. He knew Leo was a quiet child who never lied. The judge slammed his gavel again. "Mr. Vance, what is the meaning of this? This court operates on hard evidence, not the words of a 4-year-old child." "Your Honor," Marcus pleaded, turning back to the bench while holding Leo's hand. "The child is referring to his toy camera. I ask for a 5-minute recess to inspect the item. If it is truly just a plastic toy, I will have the child removed immediately. But if there is any validity to his words, the court deserves to know." The prosecutor scoffed loudly. "A toy camera? This is a stalling tactic." The judge looked at Elena, whose eyes were filled with tears as she stared at her son, then at Victoria, who was nervously tapping her manicured nails against her designer handbag. 5 minutes, the judge ruled sternly. "Bring the object to the bench." Marcus took the scuffed blue plastic camera from Leo's hands. To a casual observer, it looked like a cheap piece of molded plastic with a fake lens. But as Marcus turned it over, his fingers brushed against something unexpected on the bottom panel, a tiny, concealed rubber flap covering a modern micro-USB charging port and a micro-SD card slot. It wasn't a toy. It was a fully functional, high-definition action camera built inside a child-proof shell, designed for toddlers to record their perspectives. Victoria's breath hitched. She took a step backward toward the courtroom exit, her face draining of all color. "Your Honor," Marcus gasped, his voice booming with absolute certainty. "We need a digital monitor immediately. The silent witness has the entire truth." The bailiff quickly connected the micro-SD card from Leo's camera into the courtroom's media monitor. The screen flickered to life, displaying a shaky, low-angle video. It showed the backyard of the guest house on the night of the fire. In the foreground, Leo's tiny hands could be seen holding a plastic dinosaur, making roaring noises. But in the background, illuminated by the porch light, a figure came into sharp focus. It was Victoria. She wasn't crying or panicked. Her expression was cold and calculated as she emptied a heavy container of chemical accelerant all over the wooden deck. The camera captured her clearly as she tossed a lit lighter onto the liquid, sending a wall of flame roaring into the air. The video footage even caught her turning around, looking directly toward the bushes where Leo was playing, before she hurriedly ran back toward the main mansion to sound the alarm and frame Elena. The entire courtroom fell into a stunned, breathless silence. Julian Vance slowly turned his head to look at his fiancée, his face completely pale. "Victoria," he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and pure betrayal. "You did this? You destroyed the archives? You stole the $4 million? Victoria stumbled backward, looking wildly around the room as two bailiffs stepped forward to block the courtroom exits. Realizing she was completely cornered, her polished facade broke entirely. "Julian, you don't understand," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the walls. "Your family, your lifestyle, the pressure was too much. I needed security. I needed a backup plan." "Get her away from me," Julian said, his voice dropping to a deadly, hollow whisper. The judge slammed his gavel down with absolute authority. "Bailiffs, take the defendant into custody immediately on charges of aggravated arson, grand larceny, corporate embezzlement, and perjury." As the handcuffs clicked around Victoria's wrists and she was led away screaming, the oppressive weight that had been crushing Elena for weeks completely vanished. The prosecutor immediately moved to dismiss all charges against Elena with prejudice. Julian Vance stood up from his table. Ignoring the flashing cameras of the press, he walked across the courtroom floor and sank directly to his knees right in front of Elena and Leo. "Elena, I am so profoundly sorry," Julian said, his eyes welling with genuine tears of regret. "My arrogance blinded me. I let a monster destroy your life and almost take you away from your son. I will never forgive myself for what I put you through." Elena, holding Leo tightly in her lap, looked down at the billionaire. She took a deep breath, the pain of the past few weeks finally giving way to peace. "Justice was served today, Julian. That's all that matters to me." Julian stood up and turned to his lead attorney. "Fire our entire internal legal team by the end of the day. And pull the deed for the newly rebuilt luxury estate guest house." He turned back to Elena. "It is no longer a guest house. It is legally yours, fully furnished and fully paid for, along with a trust fund established for Leo's future education and speech therapy. It is the absolute least I can do to begin making this right." Outside the courthouse, the bright afternoon sun washed over Elena and Leo as they walked down the steps, completely free. Leo looked up at his mother, smiled widely, and pressed the shutter button on his blue plastic camera one more time. The silent witness had spoken, and an innocent family was finally safe.